Hello, sports fans. Jim Coyle with Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Thank you for stopping by our YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the subscribe and notifications toggle so you never miss a thing. All of our content up here every day. Looking forward to it. Thank you, and we'll see you on the radio.
Welcome to Indiana Sports Beat Radio, brought to you by the Hard Truth Distilling Company in Brown County, Indiana.
So for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world,
time! 3 on the way. Oh! It went in! It went in! And Indiana wins the ball game! Know your role and shut your mouth, you jabroni! Float game for the win! Ayla's gone! Goodbye, touchdown, Indy! Woo! America! They got a football team now!
Pretty simple. I win. Google me.
You know that I'm the cream of the crop.
Now, from the Hard Truth Studios, here's Jim Coyle.
Welcome back to the Hard Truth Distilling Company Studios on this Friday. And that means a visit from Zach Osterman, the IU Insider from the Indy Star. Make sure you're a subscriber. Keep local papers alive. Give Zach a follow as well if you're not already. Zach, how are you, brother?
Hey, how we doing?
Heading into the final weekend of the college basketball regular season. College conference tournaments abound. The women are playing. Some men's tournaments are already begun, and then the boys basketball going on, and then the Big Ten happening next week. It's that time of year where it is a cornucopia of basketball here in the state of Indiana. But everyone kind of focused on this coaching search. Then the rumor that got started, and I'm like, man, I hate dealing with rumors, especially ones that I just don't feel solid about. But they're fun to talk about, I guess, and that's basically what they're intended to be. But of course, I don't need to tell you the latest rumor is regarding Chris Beard. I'm still finding it hard to believe that Indiana had a change of heart, because everything that I was told was that he really wasn't going to be considered a leading candidate.
Yeah, I think what I would say, and I guess the latest I can probably offer in terms of what I've heard is that we're in a stage now where I think it's been widely sort of acknowledged Indiana has engaged Turnkey, which is the same search firm that helped him with the Kurt Signetti hire. And that Indiana has, I think it's probably fair at that point then to assume Indiana has sort of moved past the stage in the process that is sort of, let's evaluate what profile of coach we want. Like, I think, especially if you go back to the way Scott Dolson identified Kurt Signetti, I think this is an athletics director that is probably more interested in sort of defining the job and then looking for coaches that fit, rather than looking for coaches and trying to define the job around the coach, if you understand what I'm saying. And so I think the first step was going to be basically defining the scope of the job. What has made Indiana successful in the last 30 years? What has made other programs like Indiana successful in the last 30 years, 20 years, maybe even 5 years? I don't know, because you almost can look at it in terms of, generations of what was 25 years ago doesn't necessarily apply the same way what was 10 years ago, what was even 5 years ago, what was even 2 years ago in terms of NIL, portal, now revenue sharing. But the point is, I think Indiana went through that process first. Then it kind of activated, Turnkey's sort of role in all this. And I think where we're at now is probably that Turnkey is just kind of doing a lot of its due diligence. And so you're going to hear whispers of Indiana's been in touch with this coach. I mean, I've heard like any number of names, and all the ones you'd expect from, rumors about Brad Brownell or Greg McDermott or Darian DeVries or whoever. And what's probably happening is just the search firm is doing what search firms do, which is just background work, exploratory work, just very, very surface level conversations. Would there be any interest? If there was, what would it take? We're not don't take this as you're the prime candidate or whatever. We're casting a wide net. This is building out the whole portfolio. The search firm is going to take a 5-figure payout from Indiana. Trust me, they're going to earn their money, which means they're going to do a lot of legwork. They're going to talk to a lot of people. And in the meantime, there's going to be a bit of an information vacuum. And because there is justifiably such intense interest in the outcome of this search and the direction of this search and, whatever is kind of, whatever comes of all this, there's going to be an intense desire for someone or something to fill that information vacuum. And so what you're going to get is little bits and pieces of rumors popping up, kind of all over the place. I mentioned some of the names I've heard, and those shouldn't be surprising names. Ben McCollum would be another one. I think everybody is intrigued by TJ Otzelberger at Iowa State. And that doesn't mean that, Indiana is, I've seen maybe like 3 different coaches that Indiana has allegedly already agreed a contract with, depending on, what rumor you believe or what day it is or whatever.
Yes.
The point is, you're at the stage in the search where enough of this stuff is true that it's hard to prove that it's false, that all of it's false or any of it's false. But really what's probably happening for the most part, and Indiana maybe is quietly zeroing in on somebody and having the search firm do a little bit more legwork on somebody as opposed to somebody else. But a lot of what's happening now really, I think, is mostly building out the information necessary. And it's also, we're saying too, the search firm, there might be a perception, for example, that, like I heard near the beginning of the week, that there was a perception that Indiana was more focused on some mid-major candidates, like a Ben McCollum or someone like that. But then someone else kind of made the point to me when I just kind of dug into that like, well, the search firm probably needs to do more work on someone like Ben McCollum because there's less, there's less background there. There's, yes, you can look at his. I and I'm rambling here, forgive me, but I put together this
please
piece a couple of weeks ago of sort of the data points I thought might matter to Indiana in looking for a head coach. And I made the point in that piece that Ben McCollum was the sort of coach I couldn't really analyze because I looked far and wide and couldn't find reliable advanced metrics for Division II. So like the search firm is going to probably need to spend more time on Ben McCollum than it is on Greg McDermott. I'm just using these 2 men as an example. This is not me saying those are the 2 candidates, whatever. But then what can happen is because there is this thirst for information and because there isn't a lot else going on, then suddenly the perception sort of explodes that, well, Indiana must be more focused on Ben McCollum than Greg McDermott because it seems like they're asking more questions about one than the other. It's just like listen, I do think we are probably approaching the final steps of this search because ultimately Indiana is going to want to have a target identified that it's able to pursue, presumably as soon as that coach's NCAA tournament run is over. So I don't think we're that far away from Indiana, at least privately, building out some kind of, quote unquote, kind of, I don't know, like, priority list or ranking or whatever. But I also think that a lot of the noise that is kind of bouncing through the ecosystem right now is maybe being misinterpreted simply because there is such a desire for there to be information.
Exactly. I was getting ready to say, just because there is no information, they want it so badly that people grasp onto whatever little morsel that all it takes is a little spark of someone saying something with no backup, no confirmation whatsoever. And, that's fine, whatever. I tried to look at things from a common sense standpoint, like with the Brad Stevens. I'm like, yeah, I don't see that. Even after it was announced he wasn't a candidate, I saw so many people still not believing that. that's a shield. That's that's just some smoke and mirrors. And I'm like, people, come on, give it up. But and it's the same with Dusty May. As soon as he signed his extension, I couldn't believe how many people I saw that the first thing out of their mouth was, yeah, but what's the buyout? And I'm like, dude, you don't sign an extension that if you're not staying where you are. And then the response would be, well, we don't know if he would have turned Indiana down. And I'm like, he has said, in essence, did just turn Indiana down, knowing that opportunity would have been there most likely. So anyway, they moved on from that. But there is a lot of pressure on Scott Dolson because we've said this the last time as well, but boy, I mean, they kind of almost have to get this one right this time, just because it's in light of what he did with football. You took a program that was on life support, that had been on life support for years and years, and turned it into a national contender. Basketball has that tradition already, and it's a lot easier to do with basketball. So it's been a little stunning that they haven't been able to make it happen. But I think that Scott Dolson is very good at what he does. I think he is going to make the right decision. I think having the time that he has this time to make this hire is in his benefit, in Indiana fans' benefit. But if people just need to chill. I keep telling people, yeah, I'd like to know, but you know what? I'm not in that big of a hurry. Let it just happen. You're not going to change anything if you know today versus tomorrow.
Well, and this is also a product of kind of the modern sort of way that news sort of snakes through, the I don't know, the mainstream or the consciousness. Like, this whole process would have played out not that dissimilarly 20 years ago. We just wouldn't have necessarily been privy to as much of it because there wouldn't be so much sort of noise, and there wouldn't be, there would be no Trilly Donovan. There was no Trilly Donovan in 2006. You know what I mean? That, message boards were still in their infancy. Social media did not exist in the way that it does now. So a lot of this stuff that we're talking about probably happened during Indiana's search that landed on Kelvin Sampson. If memory serves, Indiana used a search firm then too. If not, then they at least had a committee. So they had like an internal committee that was making a lot of calls and things. But the point is, we just weren't as privy to it as we are now. And obviously this search in particular is longer than most because, we found out kind of in season that the coach would be stepping down at the end of the year rather than waiting until the end of the year, then making that decision public and then going on from there. And, again, compared to the Curt Cignetti thing, we know now that Indiana had been laying the groundwork for weeks to conduct that coaching search very quickly. But, none of that was public. None of that was made public or allowed to become public because Indiana had not fired Tom Allen yet. Well, we know Mike Woodson has decided to step down at the end of the season. We've known that for a month. So we've had this whole month to fill of people wanting to know who's calling who's doing this, who's going there, So it's a longer than normal coaching search. But the one thing I always find myself reminding people, and I hope this doesn't sound, paternalistic. I don't mean for it to, or patronizing. But the thing you do have to remember is, like, everybody involved here's got other jobs. Scott Dolson's got 23 other programs he's got to deal with. He's got budget meetings he's got to attend. He's got donor events that he's got to attend. He's got to deal with, he's got to meet with Curt Cignetti about the spring game, or he's got to, talk to Jeff Mercer about, planning for budgeting for travel at the end of the baseball season, or, he'll be looking already now, obviously, at fiscal projections for next year and building revenue sharing into the budget and all that different kind of stuff. And the point is, I understand and in no way criticize anyone, any IU fan who's looking at this and saying, like, this is the thing I'm thinking about more than anything else related to IU athletics is who the next basketball coach is going to be. It's an incredibly important question. As you said, it is. I mean, I at the outset, I said it was probably Indiana's most important hire in at least 50 years for this job. But in the same breath, the people conducting the search are not and cannot be thinking about this job or this process 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are just other things they quite literally have to do for their jobs, never mind their families, never mind, their own personal sanity, like any of the rest of us. So again, I think, we're in a situation where there is a thirst for information, and I'm just not sure that information in every case, I'm not sure that information exists. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't bits and pieces of truth in the different things you hear about a Chris Beard or a Brad Brownell or a Greg McDermott or whoever. That doesn't mean that it's all lies or it's all fake or it's all fabricated. It just means that we're probably only getting fragments of the whole picture. We're getting pieces of a very large jigsaw puzzle and not really understanding with no box, with no picture on the box to help us know where exactly those pieces should fit. That's kind of, I think, the stage that we're at here. Now, again, I do think all of this will clarify itself pretty quickly and possibly very soon, possibly within the next 2 to 3 weeks. But, it's kind of one of those, like, coaching searches are one of those sort of hurry up and wait processes where there's going to be times where a lot is happening in a short space of time, and then everything gets put down for a little while. And then a lot's going to happen in a short space of time, and then everything pauses for a while, and so on. And I think we're kind of in one of those dips before the rise again.
And I know that donors are very important, but with this search, Scott he's done a great job of keeping things under wraps. I just don't see him handing out information to donors, even though they're big time donors, and saying no, but you can't tell anybody, and either thinking that that's going to happen or whatever. I just don't see that information being passed along personally.
No, I don't think so either. I think you'll have a small group of people that you'll keep in the loop, at least to a certain extent, because ultimately you're going to need, them. I mean, to be frank, you're going to need their money. You're going to need, if, for example, you need to action someone's buyout, or maybe a coach says, hey, I'm going to need an extra year, and you have to go to your donors and say, can we get another, I don't know, 5 million together or something like that? Well, there's a small group of donors, that will have the financial wherewithal and the resources to be able to kind of help you fill that sort of void very quickly. But those are people that don't talk. Those are people who are well-versed in discretion, and not just around athletics, but like people, for example, who, deal with insider trading concerns at a very high level, or people who know how to keep a business deal under wraps so that it doesn't blow up. Like people who have, I guess what I'm saying is people who deal with far more serious sort of privacy concerns in their day-to-day lives, in business, in finance, whatever, than who's going to be the next basketball coach. People who know how to be discreet and know how to not leak, not leak information so that a business deal doesn't collapse or nobody runs afoul of some sort of, legal implication or something before a contract is signed. They're not suddenly going to get loose lips when it comes to IU basketball. And the other thing I would say too, and I have to jump off here in a minute, forgive me, but the other thing I would say too is it's not the people you think. Like, everyone always says to me, is it Mark Cuban? and I always say, like, it's not Mark Cuban. Like, it's by and large, it's people you've never heard of. Like, even, maybe if you live, kind of live and breathe in the IU ecosystem a lot, maybe at least some of these names. And yes, there will be a handful of them whose names are on buildings around campus or on the athletics campus or whatever. But there are a lot of people that will be involved in this sort of process, that what I'm talking about, the small handful of people Dolson is going to, if not necessarily keep in the loop, then at least kind of they'll be the first ones to know. Those are people by and large, you and I have never heard of, that are wealthier than we can imagine and more anonymous than we'd ever be aware of. So
Yeah, and looking forward to that coming down. Obviously, tomorrow, Indiana taking on Ohio State, and that has great implications as Indiana has its NCAA tournament fate in its hands, and I think that rests on tomorrow's game, as most people do.
I mean, it is about as bubbly as a game gets. I mean, it's this and Oklahoma, Texas. Like those are the two. I think the winner of both of those games maybe clinches their spot, particularly IU Ohio State. Texas, Oklahoma might be a little bit more tenuous, but I mean, it especially if it's Indiana that wins, because I mean, I know it's not like a metric data point, but Indiana would be able to say, you know, we've swept Ohio State. You know, if you're doing any kind of head-to-head bubble comparison, we've played them twice, once home, once away. We beat them both times. I think if you're Indiana, like I thought Indiana was safely in and probably safely past Dayton if they beat Oregon. The Oregon loss doesn't hurt them very much. It just would have been a big help. I'm not sure I would say Indiana's clearly past Dayton if it beats Ohio State, but I think Indiana's comfortably in the field if that's the case. And I think that Indiana, you know, would be able to go to the Big Ten tournament, whether it was playing Oregon in its first game or Illinois in its first game, looking more at opportunity and shoring up NCAA tournament seeding possibilities and ensuring itself, for example, that it didn't have to go to Dayton, rather than maybe going to Indianapolis and thinking we've got to get some wins here or we might be on the wrong side of the bubble. My
only question was, okay, let's say they beat Ohio State, but get to the Big Ten tournament, they'll probably go in as does that put them in as the 9?
No, they'd be the 10 seed. So they'd play the 15. Yeah, they'd start with that's the other thing is they'd start on Wednesday with a game that really wouldn't do them much good.
But they would get a win, and if they lost the next game, it would be a wash.
It would be a quad 2, and it would be against, I mean, quite literally the 15th place team in the conference, whether that's like a Minnesota, a USC, a Rutgers. That could also, in theory, be I don't know all the tiebreakers down there, but I guess in theory that could also be Nebraska, which is not a good matchup for Indiana. So you'd wind up in a situation where you get a game that doesn't really do much for you from a resume perspective, but if you lose it's a big problem. Whereas if you win, because basically Indiana's seeding is very simple. They're the 9 if they beat Ohio State, they're the 10 if they don't, because Ohio State and Indiana are 9 and 10. Nobody else has fewer than 11 wins or fewer than 12 losses. Nobody can pass either of them, and they can't pass anybody. They're locked into those two spots. They're just playing for the 9 versus the 10. If you're the 9, if you're Indiana, that means A, you beat Ohio State, and B, you start with a game against a likely NCAA tournament team. I think that the two possibilities are Oregon or Illinois. I don't think UCLA can get dragged into that based on tiebreakers. And then if you lose, you're the 10, and you not only did you not beat Ohio State, but you're also not you're also opening with a game that really does nothing for you, but is danger rather than opportunity. So I mean, Saturday it's a pretty big deal for Indiana. It is a pretty it is a pretty important game, all things considered.
Zach Osterman, IU Insider for the Indy Star. Make sure you're giving him a follow and be a subscriber. Keep local papers alive. Zach, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. I'll see you tomorrow.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Jim.
Hello, sports fans. Jim Coyle with Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Thank you for stopping by our YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the subscribe and notifications toggle so you never miss a thing. All of our content up here every day. Looking forward to it. Thank you, and we'll see you on the radio.